The Flower-class corvette, also referred to as the Gladiolus class after the lead ship, was a British class of 294 corvettes used during World War II by the Allied navies, particularly as anti-submarine convoy escorts in the Battle of the Atlantic. Royal Navy ships of this class were named after flowers. Most served during World War II with the Royal Navy, RN, and Royal Canadian Navy, RCN. Several ships built largely in Canada were transferred from the RN to the United States Navy, USN, under the Lend-Lease program, seeing service in both navies. Some corvettes transferred to the USN were crewed by the U.S. Coast Guard. The vessels serving with the U.S. Navy were known as Temptress and Action-class patrol gunboats. Other Flower-class corvettes served with the Free French Naval Forces, the Royal Netherlands Navy, the Royal Norwegian Navy, the Royal Indian Navy, the Royal Hellenic Navy, the Royal New Zealand Navy, the Royal Yugoslav Navy, and, immediately after the war, the South African Navy. In early 1939, with the risk of war with Nazi Germany increasing, it was clear to the Royal Navy that it needed more escort ships to counter the threat from Kriegsmarine U-boats. One particular concern was the need to protect shipping off the east coast of Britain. What was needed was something larger and faster than trawlers, but still cheap enough to be built in large numbers, preferably at small merchant shipyards, as larger yards were already busy. To meet this requirement, the Smith's Dock Company of South Bank-on-Tees, a specialist in the design and build of fishing vessels, offered a development of its 700-ton, 16 knots, 18 miles per hour, 30 kilometers per hour, whaler, whale catcher, Southern Pride. They were intended as small convoy escort ships that could be produced quickly and cheaply in large numbers. Despite naval planners' intentions that they be deployed for coastal convoys, their long range meant that they became the mainstay of mid-ocean escort force convoy protection during the first half of the war. The Flower class became an essential resource for North Atlantic convoy protection until larger vessels such as destroyer escorts and frigates could be produced in sufficient quantities. The simple design of the Flower class, using parts and techniques, scantlings, common to merchant shipping, meant they could be constructed in small commercial shipyards all over the United Kingdom and Canada, where larger, or more sophisticated, warships could not be built. Additionally, the use of commercial triple expansion machinery instead of steam turbines meant the largely Royal Naval Reserve and Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve crews that were manning the corvettes would be familiar with their operation. Flower-class vessels were slow for a warship, with maximum speed of 16 knots, 18 miles per hour, 30 kilometers per hour. They were also very lightly armed, as they were intended solely for anti-submarine warfare. Many of the RCN's original Flower-class ships were initially fitted with minesweeping equipment, while virtually all of the modified Flowers were fitted with a limited anti-aircraft capability. The original Flowers had the standard RN layout, consisting of a raised forecastle, a well deck, then the bridge or wheelhouse, and a continuous deck running aft. The crew quarters were in the forecastle while the galley was at the rear, making for poor messing arrangements. 9. The modified Flower saw the forecastle extended aft past the bridge to the aft end of the funnel, a variation known as the long forecastle design. Apart from providing a very useful space where the whole crew could gather out of the weather, the added weight improved the ship's stability and speed and was applied to a number of the original Flower-class vessels during the mid and latter years of the war. The original Flowers had a mast located immediately forward the bridge, a notable exception to naval practice at that time. The modified Flowers saw the mast return to the normal position immediately aft of the bridge. This does not seem to have been done in all of the modified builds or conversions of the original vessels. A cruiser stern finished the appearance for all vessels in the class. Flower-class corvettes were used extensively by the RN and RCN in the Battle of the Atlantic. They also saw limited service elsewhere with the RN, as well as the USN and several Allied navies such as the Royal Netherlands Navy, the Royal Norwegian Navy, the Royal Hellenic Navy, the Free French Naval Forces, the Royal Indian Navy, and the Royal New Zealand Navy. The Belgian Navy used some of these vessels during World War II, and have continued to use Flower names for their minehunters. Most Royal Navy Flower-class ships drew their officers and crew from the Royal Naval Reserve and the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, RNVR. Many RN Flowers had captains drawn from the Merchant Navy. Service on Flowers in the North Atlantic was typically cold, wet, monotonous and uncomfortable. Every dip of the forecastle into an oncoming wave was followed by a cascade of water into the well deck amidships. Men at action stations were drenched with spray and water entered living spaces through hatches opened for access to ammunition magazines. Interior decks were constantly wet and condensation dripped from the overheads. The head, or sanitary toilet, was drained by a straight pipe to the ocean, and a reverse flow of the icy North Atlantic would cleanse the backside of those using it during rough weather. By 1941, corvettes carried twice as many crewmen as anticipated in the original design. Men slept on lockers or tabletops or in any dark place that offered a little warmth. The inability to store perishable food meant a reliance on preserved food such as corned beef and powdered potato for all meals. The Flowers were nicknamed the Pekingese of the ocean. They had a reputation of having poor sea-handling characteristics, most often rolling in heavy seas, with 80-degree rolls, 40 degrees each side of upright, being fairly common. It was said they would roll on wet grass. Many crewmen suffered severe motion sickness for a few weeks until they acclimatized to shipboard life. Although poor in their sea-handling characteristics, the Flowers were extremely seaworthy. No Allied sailor was ever lost overboard from a Flower during World War II, outside combat. A typical action by a Flower encountering a surfaced U-boat during convoy escort duties was to run directly at the submarine, forcing it to dive and thus limiting its speed and maneuverability. The corvette would then keep the submarine down and preoccupied with avoiding depth charge attacks long enough to allow the convoy to pass safely. The 16 knots, 30 km per hour, 18 miles per hour, top speed of the Flower-class ships made effective pursuit of a surfaced U-boat, about 17 knots, 31 km per hour, 20 miles per hour, impossible, though it was adequate to maneuver around submerged U-boats or convoys, both of which ran at a typical maximum of 8 knots, 15 km per hour, 9.2 miles per hour, and sometimes much less in poor weather. The low speed also made it difficult for Flowers to catch up with the convoy after action. Continuous actions against a numerically superior U-boat pack demanded considerable seamanship skills from all concerned and were very wearing on the crews. 36 ships in the class were lost during World War II, many due to enemy action, some to collision with Allied warships and merchant ships. 1, sunk in shallow water, was raised and repaired. Of the vessels lost to enemy action, 22 were torpedoed by U-boats, 5 were mined and 4 were sunk by aircraft. The Flower-class corvettes are credited with participating in the sinking of 47 German and 4 Italian submarines. Construction of the Flower-class was superseded toward the end of the war as larger shipyards concentrated on River-class frigates and smaller yards on the improved Castle-class corvette design. The Flower-class represented fully half of all Allied convoy escort vessels in the North Atlantic during World War II.